Welcome to The Straight Stitch, a podcast about sewing and other fiber arts. This is episode 19, and my name is Janet Zabo. I'll be your guide as we explore all things sewing. I've got a little bit different episode for you today. My guest is John Willis of Special Operations Equipment in Camden, Tennessee, and I've actually been to Special Operations Equipment because if you remember, those of you who might have listened to some of the early podcast episodes back in October of 2023, I went to Camden to teach sewing, spinning, do demonstrations at Self-Reliance Festival. Self-Reliance Festival is held twice a year, in October and in March. And it's hosted at Special Operations Equipment. John is heavily involved with it. And Special Operations Equipment, as I discovered when I got there, is a sewing factory. So John was gracious enough to come onto the podcast and visit with me for a while about how he got started, how he started Special Operations Equipment. What I've done with this episode is break it up into two different podcasts. John and I actually visited over Zoom for about 2 hours, and the first part of our conversation was focused on sewing. The second part of the conversation, we went a little bit afield and talked a little bit more about prepping and homesteading and self-reliance and John's background in those areas. So if that's something that you're interested in, I would highly recommend that you listen to the entire podcast. It's about 2 hours, I think, or a little bit less than 2 hours. It's also, I had to mark it as explicit. We do get into some language, so you have been warned. If, however, you are only interested in the sewing portion of it, there is a shorter version of the podcast, and you can listen to that one and forego listening to the other topics that we discussed. We're all adults. I will let you decide what is appropriate for you, and I hope that you will enjoy either one or both of the episodes. We didn't have a chance to have John give his website information, so I'm going to do that now. You can find Special Operations Equipment tactical gear at the website, which is originalsoegear.com. John also has a very active YouTube channel under Special Operations Equipment. He does at least one video a day, sometimes multiple videos a day. If you're interested in getting an up close and personal look at some of the gear that he makes, he shows inventory, and he also does build videos, which I find very interesting, where he'll talk about what goes into making a particular piece of gear. I'll be back at the end of the episode to remind you of a few things that are happening in my life and around here. But now, let's get started. My guest today is John Willis of Special Operations Equipment in Camden, Tennessee. Special Operations Equipment makes tactical gear, and I'm going to let John explain more about his company and how he got started. So welcome, John.
Thank you. So originally, I did not sew anything. We were doing some t-shirts and doing gun shows. We would go to flea markets and swap meets. Which here in Tennessee is very different from San Diego. San Diego, those were big miles worth of vendors. And we would go in there and buy a booth to get in early. And we would walk around and look at everybody else's stuff. And we would buy up like sporting goods stuff and outdoors type stuff. And then we would go to gun shows with it and just sell it for a way elevated price. And my cousin, back then, we also had some t-shirts and stuff that we had done. We just took some photos of ourselves and did I think it was called a 386 line reversal. So they would take an actual black and white photo and put it onto a t-shirt, and it would look just like the photo. So we would jock up in, costumes, really military gear, take these cool pictures, and the name was Special Operations Equipment. It was not on my radar to actually manufacture anything. I had never touched a sewing machine. Mom, when I was growing up, mom made a lot of my father's uniforms when he was in the Navy, and all of my aunts and my grandma, everybody sewed, and I was born in 1971. So all growing up, to have a sewing machine in the house was very, very common. And that sewing machine was never a catch-all. It was always open. It wasn't pushed in the corner. It was not a decoration. So mom, when I started sewing, mom said, well, it's in your blood. And my cousin was getting ready to go through BUDS, which was SEAL training. And right up to that, he was a special installer for high-end car audio. And this guy came in, and he had an accelerated free fall sticker on his car and a recon jack sticker. So he was a Marine reconnaissance guy. Turns out he was a rigger. And that's the guys that do the parachutes and repair stuff. And they're kind of the guys in the special operations community that everybody comes to fix and fine tune and, build gear. It used to be when you started a tactical gear company, you really kind of came from that MOS, which was a rigger. And my cousin met this guy named Mike, and Mike had actually had some gear in the car. And my cousin said, hey, my cousin John actually does a lot of stuff with like military equipment stuff. I want to introduce you. So I met this guy that night, and he came over, and he had a belt and a chest harness and a couple things. And he said, hey, take these to the gun show and sell them. And I said, what do you want? And he gave me the price, and I took him to the gun shows and put them on mannequins. And immediately, I'd been to probably 30 gun shows at that time, and nothing like this had ever happened. People just started, how much is this? How much is this? How many can I get? And I said, well, here's the price. And I put I put $50 on top of it or whatever. And I was supposed to sell these. And I said, well, I will take your order, and then we will deliver them. And they're like, how long? And I had no concept. I'm like, probably a couple weeks, we'll have it for you in a couple weeks. And very quickly, my lined piece of paper filled up with people whose money I had and I owed this equipment to. And I came home, I think it was like $5,000 I came home with. And I'd never seen $1,000 in my life in one hand. And I was probably 17, 18 at the time, right about that. And so I come back super excited. I'm like, hey, I took all these orders, and I'm really good at selling this stuff, clearly, and you're really good at building it. You build it, I'll sell it. We'll split the money. He's like, whoa, slow down, Turbo. And I'm like, what? And he says, I'm not building all these rigs. I don't want to build these. I'm building parachutes, which he was like legitimately. He's very pinnacle of the industry in several different genres now. And I said, well, what are we going to do? He goes, well, you're going to refund that money, or you're going to learn to sew. And I go, well, I've already spent part of the money, so that's not an option. That's not happening. And I said, what do we do? And he goes, you mean, what do you do? Which is my favorite line. Who is we? And he goes, you're going to rent a sewing machine. It's $25 to rent a sewing machine. And you're going to learn to sew, and I'll teach you. And what that really was code for was, we're going to go and rent this sewing machine, and I'm going to come over for about 5 minutes and show you how the pedal works. And there was no servo motors back then. So I grew up on big, full speed. And if you want it, I still have clutch machines. I still have the first 4 machines that I ever sewed on in my building right now. And so it was finesse. You had to learn to sew. And a common question, I do live videos sewing pretty frequently, and people are like, what's that hand? What do you keep doing there? And why is it that silver thing? I go, well, that silver thing's not actually supposed to be silver. They start out black. We have drug our hands on them as it's a break point or a brake to slow that motor. And you can kind of feel what your foot's doing at the same time, just like shifting and clutching. And people now, they've never seen a clutch motor at all. And it used to be, you really would lose a lot of people when you taught them to sew. Some people it's just like back in the day, some people just never got that that manual transmission thing. So we would put, different size pulleys, which meant you had to get a different size belt. And we'd hit 5 different shops. You'd hit motor bearing parts and all the automotive shops. And finally, you'd find 2 that kind of worked. And sometimes it amplified other issues with the machine. But I rent this sewing machine, and it was a Mitsubishi 130E was the first machine I had. And then I had a 130 GM. And the difference was the oiler eye. I think that's what it was. But back then, and I keep saying back then, but it's that was a lightweight machine. That was a straight stitch, not a walking foot, not a needle feed, not a compound, just really should be sewing clothing with it. But I didn't know. And I definitely couldn't rent a walking foot because that was $50 a month. So $25 a month. Mike comes over, shows me how to make the pedal go, and I made a mini mag flashlight pouch. What he was bringing me was the center tailings of rolls of webbing. Our rolls of webbing come on 25-yard put-ups, 50-yard or 100-yard put-ups. And when the machine starts rolling, as it starts going, it really tightens that core in the center. So when you get bigger and you're cutting things on an auto cutter, a digital auto cutter, it causes backlash. So really we throw those tailings away, or we use them to scissor cut, hand cut, or burn with a rope cutter or a manual cutter. But he was giving me those, which was awesome because I had nothing. And I made the mini mag pouch. I made a knife sheath and ran out of thread on the mini mag. And Mom's like, "Oh, I'll show you how to do it." And she came out and had no idea, like a home machine. She sewed on a White's machine. And I remember her always saying, the White's machines are the only machines that are all still metal. And that meant nothing to me at the time. And nowadays we use some prosumer kind of commercially available, like Brother embroidery machines. And we get 90 days, sometimes 6 months out of them. And we literally pick them up and put them in the dump the future. And we have no resupply, and times really get tough and we go back to the old ways. We make gear that your great grandchildren, people with your last name who have not even been thought of into existence yet, will still be able to use that equipment. It'll be sitting in a museum 200 years from now. And that's what we built. So we were using 1,000 denier Cordura, but the way we put our mag pouch, I say me, the way I put my mag pouches together, I was sewing through 9 layers and even 13 layers of material with a lightweight machine and a pretty skinny needle. And we use a 22, 23 now, and that's what we were using then. But on that lighter weight machine, that barrel that goes up in that needle bar was different. And we would bend those things. And best case scenario, because it's going through so much material, I'm using my hands, and I know this is a podcast, but when you would go through that material, it would deflect. It would kind of flex the needle. So as you're coming down, it wouldn't go through that hole in the needle plate. It would hit the side of the needle plate or even the feed dog. So best case scenario, you bend a needle. Next best case is you break and shatter the needle, which I've had needles like stuck in my face. I've had them in my lip. I've had them, mostly face. And worst case scenario is that needle bent and it didn't needle, but it stayed intact and it pushed that needle bar up and knocked that sewing machine out of time. Well, I didn't know anything about timing. So every other week or so, we're pulling the head off of that. And I didn't even know the head came off the machine. The first few times we did it, we put the motor stand and everything in a truck, and we would go to Tijuana, which is about an hour from where we were. And on the other side of the border, Tijuana was a lot different then than it is now. And we would go down there and get some guy to time this sewing machine. And inevitably in Mexico, you're sitting there watching him, and that sewing machine would sew perfectly, and you would test sew it and it would sew perfectly. But someplace between Mexico and my house in San Diego, that sewing machine stopped sewing perfectly. I don't know why. Maybe it just the barometric pressure of Mexico or the aspect of the sun. I don't know what it was, But it was just, we worked a long time. I worked a long time with machines that never sewed properly. And these were rental sewing machines. So I never knew that where that thread comes down at the needle bar and goes right before it goes in the needle, there's a little hook that keeps that needle, that thread in line. I never knew that part existed till a decade later. When you hit that foot, that knee press that lifts the foot, I never knew that it was supposed to release tension coming through the guide, because that little peg in there is broken on. I never knew that. I didn't even know that till maybe a decade ago. So we got really good. And I tell people now, they're like, this machine's breaking thread. I go, you want to be a really good operator? Get fast at rethreading. Like, we didn't even know it was an option not to be. It was kind of a shock when I moved from San Diego to Tennessee. In San Diego, we had Mexican labor, and Mexican labor, I think for the most part, grew up out of necessity, right on the other side of the border. Tijuana, Ensenada, Rosarito, Ensenada, and there's huge textile industry. Everybody just sewed. And I think even back 20 years ago, I think people just sewed because they were taught in home ec and stuff. It was different when we came to Tennessee. When we came to Tennessee, we immediately ran a radio spot and a newspaper ad. We had 127 people show up the first week, of which we hired 3. Not because we didn't want to hire more, because what we found, because Carhartt, HIS, Chick Jeans, all your big textile companies were here. In theory, they had been here. We heard, hey, the factory's closed down, everything went to Mexico. So in theory, all those assets should still be here. And when we got on the ground, we were going to factories that were closed down and looking at places that were so big you could run like rally car races inside them, enormous. And it was weird because you would walk into these plants that literally looked like General Dynamics from San Diego, and everything was there. There was hundreds of sewing machines there. There were pallets of denim cut in 4x8 sheets that were 8 feet tall. Crazy. Like, it was literally like aliens had come down and beamed up all the people, but the whole factory was still there. So we thought the people were here also. And what we found was we were really about 10 years behind where we thought we were. So a lot of the people who had the skill, they had just retired, they were on pensions, and a lot of them are just no longer with us. So we did get some people in, and I'm like, okay, here's the sewing machines, change your thread. And they were saying, like, we don't know how to change the thread. I'm like, what are you talking about? They like, we have a man that comes around every morning and changes the thread. And then they're like, hey, I need a new needle. I'm like, what do you mean you need a new needle? Unless it's broke, you don't need a new needle. I change a needle when it's broken or when there's a burr or something in it. And they said, yeah, we had a guy that changes the needles every morning. So a lot of the big factories, we sew a product from start to finish. And I have 14,000 part numbers just in 2 models of belts we make. And we make probably upwards of 1,000 products that are not belts, just completely opposite products. So we build everything start to finish in a day. We do low volume. We're boutique. We might build 48 pieces. We might build 100 pieces. And we'll do, 10,000 piece contracts back in the day. So when we hired people, like Carhartt is here still a going concern. We hire Carhartt people, and we'll get people, they're like, yeah, I'm at this level, I got performance pay, and I'm the 3rd person in the company. I'm like, awesome, perfect. We'll pay you twice what you're making. They can't sew though. It's literally it's a button pusher. It's an automated tacker. All they have a drill hole in the material. They line it up, and the machine does everything. They're really good at loading and unloading, but they can't control a machine. So when you find somebody that can, that's really special. Or when you find somebody that wants to learn to do that. And it very much is a dying industry. I sat in at one IFLA or somewhere, one of the textile shows, and the CEO of, I think it was Arc'teryx, was in there. And she said, we don't even sew any of our products anymore. Everything's laminated. It's RF frequency binded. It's glued together. She said, you're a couple years away from the textile industry actually having no sewing machines in it. And if you look at a lot of stuff now, everything's laser cut. And I mean, I always tell people, I'm like, you're worried about, trust your material. You know, it's proven, it's been around a long time. And you get these old timers that are like, I don't know about that buckle on that belt. I don't trust that aluminum. I'm like, you were flying around in an aluminum helicopter when you were in Vietnam. And here I am saying that kind of same stuff, but the laminate materials, a lot of the up and comers in the industry use them because you don't have to be skilled. You can buy a tabletop laser machine. It cuts everything out because it's laminated, where we're using unlaminated material. We're using a laminated, it has a DWR, durable waterproof coating on it, which holds the fabric. So when we cut the fabric, it doesn't unfray. Whereas the laminate stuff, and we would take those edges and fold them under or hem them or edge tape them. With the laminate stuff, you can have a very raw, crude looking product that is not going to come apart because the laser does 90% of your work. And while it's cutting it, it also kind of sears that edge. So when you look at rigs in the new up and coming rigs in the industry on par kind of, or in my arena, there's only 4 pieces of stitching, 6 pieces of stitching on a lot of them. And it's all tacked. It is a tacker. They just set it in place and it just automatically tacks that. So you can kind of enter into this now and not have to be skilled labor or have skilled labor. There's not a lot of craftsmen still out there. There are groups out there that I'm sure you're aware of, just like everything. There's tactical gear groups out there, and there's a ton of up and comers stepping into this industry, hobbyists and stuff. So there are kids that are learning the skill. I started about a year ago, probably. I said, man, I'm just gonna sew on video. Like I do it all the time. And I did it more as a demonstration. People are like, how did you get where you are? How do I do what you do? You just have to relentlessly persevere and never stop. Like I work 24 hours a day, and people are like, yeah, he just says that. I'm like, no, I legitimately work 24 hours, like for real, a lot of days. And I used to turn the camera on at 1 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning, just to show, here's what I tell you. I know people hear this and they're like, that's not possible. But then people were like, hey, I love watching you build this stuff. So we started building some actual build videos. I said, I'm just going to show how to do this. And guys are like, aren't you worried about people copying your stuff? I go, who's copying my stuff? China's ordering it. Some dude in San Diego orders it, ships it. They're copying it anyways. I go, let's just build it. And I had seen a company, I can't remember the name of them. They a real well-known leather company, builds these beautiful leather bags. And somebody had like knocked it off and like literally stitch for stitch. And he goes, here, I'm going to show you what it takes to build this thing. And they actually, they don't own it, but the whole town in Mexico is this whole company town. They've got a church, they've got a big chow hall. That town literally exists, and everybody that chooses to live there works for that company. And they showed how to build this video, and then there's, I don't know, 80,000 comments in like a couple days on this video, and all of them were like, yeah, that's crazy. I'll be happy to pay the $400 or whatever the bag cost. So I just started doing it, and I saw sales go up from it. Yeah, I every night I do a live feed, and we've got hundreds of people on my live feed, and we can talk about anything you want to talk about. And kids come on. I say kids, I mean, they might be grown men with grandchildren for all I know. People come on and they're like, hey, I saw your video on the sling, or I saw your video on this bag, and I'm building one. I'm like, awesome. But at the same time, there's 20 dudes that are like, hey, I saw your video on that bag, and I totally understand why it costs what it costs now. So it's just bringing them in, right? It's bringing them in, getting them interested, and having a conversation, and adding value. I just put value out there, and it bounces back all the time. It just works that way. I don't know what direction to go with this. Like, so from San Diego, self-taught how to sew. When we started building stuff, and so we were back at the gun shows, and military dudes would see our stuff, and they're like, hey, I want to buy this thing. So it always took a couple of guys, and especially like the SEAL teams. Everybody wanted to have something different. And when the guy had a cool piece of kit, the other guys in the platoon are like, where'd you get this? And they'd literally be like, oh, I don't remember where I got it, or I had it custom made. They call it Gucci gear. Everybody wants to have something, but they always want to one up each other. So we'd get another dude come in and he's like, hey, Mike, and my platoon has one of these. I'm like, yeah, I built it for him. Here's the drawings. He's like, oh man, that guy said he didn't remember where he got it from. But what would happen is you'd have these junior level guys, enlisted dudes would buy this stuff, and you'd have 16 dudes in the platoon. And then the officer would be like, I want one. Why am I paying for this? And then they would get you, the purchase order would come forth. And then you'd get a contract, or the sister platoon at that level would come in and buy stuff. Back then, each platoon, when they were forming up, would get what was called an AMPAC card. And they basically had a debit card, and they could go to REI or Sports Chalet or sporting goods store and buy their own rope and boots and outdoor gear to use on the job as a SEAL. And they were, once I started taking credit cards, we were also able to process those cards. We would always hear from the purchase agent, who is usually not a operator. He's usually like an admin dude that has kind of been assigned to NSW, Naval Special Warfare. And they'd be like, hey, do you take purchase orders? And I'm like, no, but we take AMPAC cards, which is back then it would max out. You couldn't take an AMPAC card. You couldn't run it for more than $5,000 at a time, but you could get authorization to $10,000. And then fast forward, we're doing purchase orders for 1st Marine Division for 1,000 gas mask covers, and it just kind of took off.
So I assume at this point you discovered that you needed a heavier duty machine.
Oh, I didn't have a heavier duty machine for 10 years. We did all of this still on a 130E. We were bringing in, because it was still, I was not a business person. I was a guy that liked to sew, and people sought me out to buy equipment, and I never managed money. So if I could buy a walking foot at $50 a month, I could get 2 single needle straight stitch for $50 a month. So, I mean, we were scaling. We went from, we had 36 people in San Diego at one point, and we were still running 130Es because I had them and I had just bought them. They were, $350, $400, and I had paid years on some. I could have bought it outright in a couple of, in a year. But I just kept renting them. And then we would rent some heavier duty machines. And then finally we started buying machines. And those machines are still out there today. Like, you can buy those same machines. I'm in a group, and somebody had said, hey, what does it really take to start building this stuff? And you've kind of got these gatekeepers now. And they were all, I know them, like they were guys that were asking me questions on internet forums 25 years back, asking the same questions these youngsters coming up are asking. And now they're like, use the search function. I'm like, you didn't use the search function. Give them the real answer. Like, come on, man, don't make me post all the emails you sent me. And they're like, well, you really need about $5,000, and you need this machine that's $3,000. And I'm like, no, you don't. And you don't, because we all started on 130Es. And I did a search, and I found 7 or 8 of them on eBay for sale and Marketplace. And they're still going for, like, I saw them from anywhere from $100 to $350. And some of them have servo motors by now on them, and you can put a servo motor. So back to the clutch motor, like, you used to really have to have finesse. And if you were really holding onto that wheel and you let that clutch motor go, it would torque your wrist. It could possibly even break your wrist, I guess, if you held on tight enough. But now we put servo motors on machines. And when we start somebody out that's not comfortable on a machine, we've got that motor turned way down. So that machine just chugs. And as she's doing better, we just slip in at night when she's gone and turn it up a click. And every couple days or weeks, we turn it up another click. And she never even questions it. She's like, hey, this machine's going 10 times faster than when I started a month ago. She never even notices that it happened.
I have a clutch motor on my industrial serger, and I actually like it better than the servo on my Juki 1541.
Yeah, I don't care for the clutch or the servo motors. I still have clutch motors on machines that I use today. I always joke on the video, I'm like, why I'm sewing this? Because I sew very fast. And I'm like, I'm sewing this fast? They're like, no, why? I'm like, because the machine won't go any faster. Like, the motors will outsew the machine. But I just like that old metal. Like I'm looking right now. You saw I think I've got 22. I bought 22 old Singer heads just to do an art display. I'm going to do a wall with them and backlight them. And we always go to antique stores and we see the old treadle machines, and we bought one, and it's very cool. I'm looking at a big, huge Singer that is a giant um, leather machine
Is
that
it a
is a treadle.
29? Is it a
I
shoe
don't know.
patcher?
It is. It's big. It's got
Yeah.
that big ridge on the back that's all reinforced.
Yeah.
Yeah, Collier Equipment has them in there. Super, super cool. I'm a survivalist, which has become a bad word, which has become prepper. And as you mature, the ultimate goal of a prepper is to have a homestead. So I guess I'm a homesteader now. But I always look at things like, what if the power went out? What if whatever? And I just bought a cream separator, which I don't even have a cow. But I bought this giant cast iron cream separator. I just love that old stuff. And I figure I never walked in for 25 years of being in this industry. And there's literally like, I used to sarcastically say, I created this industry, but people started pointing out that they're like, you actually did create part of this industry. Like there are people that are able to buy materials right now because you bought enough of them and had them created and did die runs that they now currently warehouse them and we're able to buy a roll at a time. I don't know why I went in that direction, but backing up to that, like we used to buy material from UFO, which is upholstery fabric outlet, and we do something called OG Original Gangsters, what they call it, OG SOE, and it was all OD black and green because all I could get, the closest military color you could buy without having a mill run a whole die lot, which was 10,000 yards of it, which was, I mean, I was renting $25 sewing machines. So a $50,000 die lot of material it wasn't even, not only could I not do it, I didn't even know like that it existed. And we would buy OD green material, and then we would go to sporting goods, mostly like climbing shops, and buy by the foot. We'd buy webbing, and I would go in there, and eventually we're buying all their rolls of webbing. And you keep coming in here and buying all our webbing. Why don't you just buy it where we buy it? And that had never crossed my mind. So they're like, yeah, there's a company in Cal right here that you can. So I called them, and they're like, yeah, come on up here. So I come up, I have a credit card, right? Somebody mailed me a credit card. So I've got a $350 credit card, and I go up into this place up, a couple hours from where I live in San Diego, and they put me in this meeting room, and I'm like, yeah, I've seen this on TV before, meeting room. And I'm like, okay, I want to buy this, and this. And they go, okay. And they bring these samples out, and they're like, we usually sell it by the case, but we'll sell it to you by the roll. I'm like, perfect. Here's my credit card. And they're like, we don't take credit cards. So it's like every time you thought you were a footstep ahead, you were getting pulled back. So anyways, I don't remember how we got the money from the credit card to them, but I did go home that week with some rolls of webbing. But all you could get was black. I'm like, hey, I need green, olive drab green. And they're like, well, we can do it, but you're going to have to order 5,000 yards of it. I'm like, okay, well, what does that look like? What do those numbers look like? And I need 1-inch webbing, 1.5-inch webbing, 2-inch webbing. And then I need all of those in hook also. So 1-inch, 1.5-inch, 2-inch in loop Velcro and hook Velcro. So I need 9 different things, right? And I need 5,000 yards of each of it. It was going to be like $70,000 to get those. That wasn't happening. It was not even a realm of possibility. So I'm just building this stuff, and everything has black edging, black webbing, black Velcro. And when you fast forward and we really started doing business, and really the demarcation was, I don't know, 8 to 10 years into it, people are like, why don't you take credit cards? I'm like, I ain't messing with credit cards. If you want my stuff, you'll send me cash, or you'll send me a check. And the month we took credit cards, we did 10 times in sales. Like literally, the easier you make it for people to do business with you, the more money they will give you. And at that point, now we had some revenue coming in. We were bringing in so much money even that our credit card companies were freezing my accounts, thinking we were committing fraud. So we'd have to have the banks get a hold of the credit card company and be like, "Hey, no, this is real." And the credit card company was making us fax over, and the fax paper back, it was thermal printer, so it took forever on the internet and stuff, um, over the phone. But we would have to send them copies of the orders. They wanted to see purchase orders when we were running anything over like $1,000, and we were consistently doing this all the time. And we were just getting stopped every time we would start moving, and we'd have some order for 20 grand or whatever, and we'd start building this, and then all of a sudden they wouldn't free the funds up. So we're waiting for them to free the funds up. We'd have to send over all the paperwork, and there was times when we're just sitting in limbo for weeks because they're not freeing the money. And I didn't know anything about accounts receivable finance. I knew nothing of business, nothing at all. And but back to the OD Green stuff, that is still a hot seller now. Like, that original gear still sells, and you can look on my website and see OD/black or OGSOE, and it's the talk of the town still, for our clientele. Like, we sell out of everything we make in that stuff. But fast forward, we were able to get those colors and get that stuff run. We were able to finally buy enough of it. And then those companies are like, "Hey, there's a demand for this." So they started warehousing it and having it run through the mills and stuff.
Wow. I love your build videos because you're a great teacher. I don't know if anybody's ever told you that.
So I don't think I am. I just kind of
You
talk my
are.
way. I talk my way through it.
I
There's
have
there's a
learned
ton.
stuff watching your build videos.
So I watch. I say kids, like I watch other people's stuff. Literally like teenagers sewing stuff, and I'm like, holy cow! That right there saves that process 30% of the labor. We've been doing it hard for 30 years. And so what I started to say earlier is, like, I'd never walked into a factory that was actually running. I never saw workflow. I just took some scissors, literally any scissors. I didn't even know what sewing scissors were. We used any scissors, and we were cutting webbing. And when we got bigger orders, we were literally marking all the way. And I mean, like on one of my LBVs, or a med pouch, I got a med pouch that we had an order for 1,500 units. There's 27 pieces of webbing on there. So that's double that amount of cuts. And we would mark all that out with a Sharpie, unroll the whole roll of web because we were dumb. And then we'd cut it with scissors for days. And then we would meet at my friend's gas station, at a mobile station where they worked nights. And we would use all the Zippo lighters because they were getting them in these mysterious 50 packs. And we would Zippo lighter thousands of pieces of webbing, just seared enough. And the lighters were heating up so much that the tabs that hold the metal part on, and the metal part holds that roller that hits the sparker, those were getting so hot that the plastic would stretch and finally let go, and it'd go psh, and it would shoot the spring and the sparker. So we were using them for a couple minutes, set them down while they cooled, and then use another one. Like, we had a contract for a big holster, and we had a 1,000-piece contract, and it took us 6 weeks to cut all the material, and that was like, your friends would come over and help you do that stuff, but not like you're going to do it, right? So we'd have 10 people doing that stuff. And then we would take like the material, we would use 2 pieces of Cordura, which is the industry standard. That's the material all of our stuff is made of. But we would put a 1050 ballistic inside because it was way stiffer, way heavier hand. So we'd use 3 pieces of that, and we'd trace them all out, and we'd scissor cut them. And then we would take and make 1-inch marks all the way on top and bottom and all the sides. And then we'd use a ruler and make all those lines to make the stitches, because we were quilting them they had 1-inch grid all over them. So my buddy Dave makes a template, and he has the idea he's going to make this template on this plastic and drill holes in it. And then once these perimeters are all sewn together, he's going to put them out on the tables in the front yard and use climbing chalk or gym chalk and it's just going to magically fall through the holes and it's all going to be good in the hood. And I come home and mom's entire front yard and driveway looks like we just kicked over, I don't know, hundreds of pounds of chalk. There is chalk everywhere. There's chalk. I'm coming up the street and start seeing chalk in the road. And I never thought find the center point and just draw these lines with use a gauge. It never entered my head for a decade. Just make a gauge for something that you're using, find center and just use this template, right? You just don't know what you don't know. And with the internet the way it is now, those are the little tips. People, every time I put a video on, some guys like, I never thought to, when I'm changing thread, I never thought to cut it from the cone off the thread stand and tie the new one in and then pull it through. I go, yeah, I say that every video because I didn't think about it for 20 years. And when you tie that, we use 70, it used to be 69E. We use nylon thread. It's the industry standard. And when you tie that knot and you're pulling it through, you can pull it really easy at first, but as soon as it hits that first tensioner and stutters, it will cut you to the bone. And that's why I tell guys, I'm like, when you're tie this on, loop it a couple times around your finger, pull it through till you hit it, be cognizant of where that knot is. That's where, and that injury, I've got one on my thumb right now where we just had all this ice and snow. So I was outside. I've got a little split on my finger that's been, I'll bump it on something and it'll bleed. And I don't care about the split, but I get blood on product, So you'll have a wound like that that'll be open because you'll keep hitting it for 2-3 weeks.
Or even something as simple as winding a bobbin while you're sewing.
Yes. Now our bobbins, I don't know who your audience is, but like a home sewing machine winds bobbins differently. I'll come into the factory and I'll hear one of the machines just running wide open. And I know, I'm like, they're winding bobbins. And I go, hey, and I say it being a smartass, I'm like, you might not know this, but that sewing machine will wind that bobbin while you're sewing. I mean, we have a couple in the shop, and I can't fathom why people use them, but we have auto winders in the shop. And then you find out that you could actually not ever wind a bobbin again. Your thread companies will sell you thread already on bobbins, on cardboard bobbins, and then you just dispose of them. So you just don't know what you don't know. And I learn stuff still every single day now that we have sewing machine groups. I get in there just trying to add some value, help somebody out new. But every couple of days, I'm like, oh my God, like that cuts this process 10%. That saves me 50%. And like you have this concept of, well, it costs more money. Man, human labor, accumulative human labor and repetitive motion, like it just adds up, man. It just economy of motion too. I'm like, look, when you're doing this, because we still scissor cut stuff. We don't have an Autometrics cutter, no Gerber cutter. Like we literally Barney style, like a second grader making, paper dolls and snow angels. We trace a pattern with a colored pencil and we cut it out with scissors. And I tell these guys, I'm like, look, you're jacking you're standing facing the table and you're making a horizontal cut. You're jacking your wrist 90 degrees.
Yep.
I know that you think that you're indestructible right now, because I still think I'm indestructible right now. But it is accumulative, man. And you don't realize that you do this thousands of times a week. And the simple fix is turn your body sideways. Cut in straight. Like if you watch me cut, people are like, why does he move that roll of material around? I make all my forward cuts and then I turn it and I make my sideways cuts, but forward. It's like, you just don't know what you don't know. And as young people, I drive all these big, huge monster trucks and stuff. And everybody was like, when you get older, you're going to feel that. And every time I had a surgery, the doctor's like, you might not ever ride this motorcycle again. And I always thought they told me that just so you would think you'd be impressed with the surgery they did on you. When you're like, I'll show you. But when I turned 30, I still have that big truck, and I would just get up and down out of that. I'd just hop up there. And like magic, man, when I turned 30, I'm like, I kind of feel this. I should probably stop jumping out of there. And then for my 35th birthday, I bought myself a set of steps, I still have the old building up the street. And the loading dock, it's only like 3 feet. I just run up there and just hop, skip, jump up there. But at 35, I'm like, I can't afford to break an ankle, right? I stopped riding dirt bikes and started driving, running 4-wheel race. We still jump them and do crazy stuff, but we're in a 5-point harness, right? It's when we destroy a car, jumping it over something you totally shouldn't be doing. It's not a helicopter flight to the trauma center anymore. You walk away from that stuff. And I'm very cognizant of that. And I tell that to young people a lot. With sewing, with any walk of life. I'm like, you're indestructible right now, but we do things when we're young. And I know that when we're young, we don't think about being 70, 80, 90 years old, but the things we do right now are very accumulative. And also you can remove a lot of that when you put in the work right now. When you're young in the proper way, it adds quality of life on the back end. And I think it's that teetering point, right? I say, no matter how I look at it, over half of my life is gone. Like it's never getting better. I can't change what I've done, but I can guide the people that are going to do what I've done, right? I can say it. People tried to tell me when I was young, like back to the business thing. Very, very successful people in business that you see on television and that they make movies about would try to mentor me. And I'm like, no, I know what I'm doing. And I definitely have like burned relationships over that. There are people that I want to be involved with now that remember my smart ass mouth when I was, 15, 20 years ago, even. So I think I've matured in business, in life, and business is kind of going in different directions. Still sew, don't have any plans to not sew. Starting fresh, I would definitely do things. I would still do the same product. I would just do it differently, right? As we get older and we acquire a lot of things, like I've still got 4 other buildings full of stuff. And when we walked out of the old factory and moved into this one, the day I bought this property, I never planned on putting SOE in here. But when we did decide to do it, we did it in 3 days, and we still left tons of equipment. Like if this building got burnt down or tornado wiped it off the map, we would go to work up the street on Monday. Like it literally seamless. If this building was on fire, I wouldn't even watch it burn. I'd be at the other building getting the mold and the spider webs out of it and going to work.
I hope you enjoyed that visit with John Willis, and I hope that you will go to his website or his YouTube channel and check out some of his gear and videos. Not much has been happening here sewing-wise. I didn't have a terribly productive week last week. That's just how things go sometimes, depending on my schedule. I will be talking about some of the things that I've been working on and cogitating on, some fitting issues, some things I ran into this week. That'll all be in the episode next week. Next week's episode is not going to be an interview show. I'm going to be pontificating about some things that have been on my mind. Just a reminder that I will be teaching 3 knitting classes at Sew Expo in Puyallup, Washington at the end of February. You can go to the Sew Expo website at www.sewexpo.com and register for classes there. I hope to see some of you there. Please come up and introduce yourselves. I'm teaching a few serger classes here locally, and I'm working on some other projects and interviews for future shows. As always, you can check out the show notes for this episode on the podcast website, which is thestraightstitchpodcast.com. You can find out more about what I'm doing here in Montana on my blog, which is at www.janetzabo.com. And as always, I would love it if you would leave a review on Apple Podcasts. That helps other people find the podcast, or feel free to share it around with friends, anyone that you know who may share your love of sewing. So until next time, I hope you have a great week and that you get to go sew something.